The scent of old paper, lavender, and the faint, sterile undercurrent of medical antiseptic, that is what my life has smelled like for the past 5 years. My name is Maya. I am 36 years old, and while most women my age are climbing the corporate ladder, buying their second homes, or agonizing over private school admissions for their toddlers, my reality is starkly different. I am the middle child of the Hawthorne family, and I am the sole, full-time caretaker for my elderly parents. To understand the magnitude of what happened, you first have to understand the Hawthorne estate. It isn't just a house. It is a sprawling, Victorian-era behemoth situated on 4 acres of pristine, old-growth forest just outside the city limits. With its wraparound mahogany porches, slate roof, intricately carved gables, and a library that looks like it was plucked from a 19th-century novel, the estate is easily worth north of $3 million. It is the crown jewel of our family's history, bought by my grandfather and lovingly maintained by my father, Arthur, until his health began to fail. My father was a brilliant architect, a man who built towering skyscrapers but always found his truest peace pruning the heritage rose bushes in the backyard. My mother, Eleanor, was a concert pianist whose delicate fingers now shake too violently from Parkinson's disease to even hold a teacup without spilling. Dad's heart is failing, his body betrayed by a series of mini-strokes that have left him wheelchair-bound and easily fatigued. Taking care of them is an exhausting, beautiful, agonizing, and relentlessly demanding job. My days begin at 5 in the morning to the sound of Mom's oxygen machine humming. I manage a complex matrix of 32 different medications, coordinate physical therapy, prepare pureed meals that I try to make look appetizing, handle the specialized bathing routines, and spend hours just sitting with them, holding their hands, listening to the same stories they've told me 1,000 times. I gave up my career as a senior software engineer in Seattle to move back home to the East Coast. I didn't mind. I had made a small fortune from a tech startup acquisition in my late 20s, a fact I kept entirely to myself because of the other 2 characters in this story. My siblings. David is 40. He is the eldest, the golden boy who somehow manages to fail upward. He works in wealth management, which is an ironic title given that he is perpetually drowning in debt from bad investments, expensive divorces, and a lifestyle designed entirely to impress people he despises. He drives a leased Porsche that he can't afford and wears bespoke suits to hide the moral decay underneath. Chloe, at 31, is the baby of the family. She refers to herself as a lifestyle content creator and brand ambassador. In reality, she is an unemployed narcissist who subsidizes her trips to Tulum and Dubai by maxing out credit cards and, until recently, begging our parents for bridge loans that never got repaid. For 5 years, while I changed adult diapers, monitored blood pressure, and slept on a cot at the foot of my parents' bed during particularly bad health scares, David and Chloe were ghosts. They would show up for exactly 4 hours on Thanksgiving and Christmas, take a few selfies with Mom and Dad to post on Instagram with captions like, "Family is everything. So blessed to spend time with my amazing parents." Family first, and then vanish before the dinner dishes even needed to be cleared. They never offered to pay for a night nurse. They never offered to relieve me for a weekend so I could sleep. They existed only in the periphery, waiting for the inevitable. But greed is a powerful motivator, and a year ago, their peripheral existence suddenly became highly localized. It started when Dad had a particularly severe medical episode. He developed a sudden and terrifying bout of pneumonia that landed him in the intensive care unit. Mom, terrified and frail, essentially shut down. I was living at the hospital, sleeping in the waiting room chairs, living off vending machine coffee and sheer adrenaline. It was the most vulnerable our family had ever been, and like vultures circling a dying animal, David and Chloe descended. They flew in, not to help, but to execute a plan. They arrived at the hospital in a flurry of performative tears and loud, dramatic wailing. They brought terrible hospital cafeteria food, cornered the doctors to demand answers, as if they had been deeply involved in the day-to-day care, and generally made a massive nuisance of themselves. But their real target wasn't the medical staff. It was Mom and Dad. While I was out of the room meeting with a pulmonary specialist, David and Chloe went to work. They convinced my parents, who were exhausted, heavily medicated, terrified of dying, and desperate for the affection of their absent children, that I was buckling under the pressure. They spun a web of faux concern. Maya is so stressed, Mom, Chloe had apparently purred, holding my mother's shaking hand. She looks terrible. We need to take some of the administrative burden off her. Let us handle the boring paperwork so she can just focus on loving you. David presented them with a stack of legal documents. He claimed they were simple medical proxies, just a backup plan in case something happened to me, or if Dad needed emergency surgery and I couldn't be reached. He brought a notary public with him, a friend of his from the city. My parents, wanting to believe in the goodness of their children, and too exhausted to read the fine print, signed the papers. When I returned to the room, the documents were gone, the notary was gone, and David and Chloe were suddenly packing their bags, claiming they had a massive work crisis they had to attend to. They hugged me, told me I was a saint, and disappeared back to their selfish lives. I thought nothing of it. I was just relieved Dad was going to survive. 6 months passed. Dad recovered from the pneumonia, though his baseline was weaker. Life returned to its grueling, love-filled routine. The incident at the hospital faded from my memory. Then came the second week of October. The air was turning crisp, the leaves on the estate's massive oak trees turning brilliant shades of gold and crimson. Chloe had surprisingly announced she was coming for a weekend visit, claiming she needed a mental reset away from the city. She arrived on a Friday, carrying a designer overnight bag and reeking of expensive perfume. On Saturday afternoon, while my parents were taking their mandated afternoon naps, Chloe was lounging in the sunroom, furiously typing on her iPad. She abruptly jumped up, cursing about having left her specialized charger in her car, and rushed out the front door, leaving the iPad unlocked and awake on the wicker coffee table. I was walking through the sunroom with a load of laundry when it happened. An email notification dropped down from the top of her iPad screen. The text was large, and I couldn't help but see it. Sender, David Hawthorne. Subject, Ray. Closing timeline and eviction. Preview text. The broker confirmed the buyer is willing to waive the inspection. We just need to get the old folks into Sunnyside by the 15th so we can clear. I froze. The laundry basket slipped from my hands, landing on the Persian rug with a soft thud. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Closing timeline. Eviction, Sunnyside. I knew I shouldn't snoop. I knew it was a violation of privacy. But the words eviction and the old folks overrode any moral hesitation. I set the basket aside, walked over to the table, and tapped the notification. What I found was a chain of emails between David, Chloe, a sleazy cut-rate real estate agent named Marcus, and an administrator at a facility called Sunnyside Meadows. As I read, the blood drained from my face, replaced by a cold, radiating horror. The documents my parents had signed at the hospital 6 months prior were not just medical proxies. They were durable, springing powers of attorney, granting David and Chloe complete control over my parents' finances and real estate, effective immediately upon a doctor's declaration of diminished capacity. And David, it turned out, had paid off an unscrupulous, private concierge doctor to write exactly that letter based on their medical records. The plan was laid out in agonizing, sociopathic detail. David was facing bankruptcy and a massive lawsuit from a former client. Chloe owed nearly $100,000 in credit card debt and back taxes. They needed cash, and they needed it immediately. The Hawthorne estate, completely paid off and highly desirable, was their golden ticket. Their scheme was to use the power of attorney to legally seize control of the estate. They had already quietly listed the house as a pocket listing, through their agent, Marcus, to avoid a public MLS posting that I might see. They had found an all-cash buyer, a developer who wanted to gut the historical interior and turn it into a sterile modern monstrosity, willing to pay $3.2 million. But they couldn't sell the house with my parents living in it, and they certainly couldn't sell it with me there. The emails detailed their plan to execute the eviction. They had forged a lease agreement making me a month-to-month tenant of my parents, and then drafted a 30-day notice to quit, which they planned to bypass entirely by claiming I was an abusive caretaker to get me immediately removed by the police. Worse, far worse, was their plan for our parents. To maximize their payout, they were refusing to place them in a quality memory care or assisted living facility. Instead, they had secured 2 beds at Sunnyside Meadows. I knew about Sunnyside. Everyone in the county knew about Sunnyside. It was a miserable, state-funded nightmare of a facility, constantly under investigation for neglect, elder abuse, and health code violations. It smelled of urine and despair. The staff-to-patient ratio was criminal. Sending my fragile father and terrified mother, there was a death sentence. It would kill them within 6 months. Chloe's email read, "Make sure the movers are cheap. I don't want to spend more than $1,000 on getting their crap out. Just pack the essentials for Sunnyside and we'll dump the rest in a storage unit or trash it. Once the wire transfer from the house hits, I'm booking my flight to Milan." Maya is going to flip her lid, lol. Let her, she can figure out her own life. David's response, already handled. Movers and Marcus will be there on the 15th at 10 a.m. We show up, present the POA, hand Maya the eviction and the restraining order, and the movers pack up the old folks. Clean, fast, brutal. We split the $3.2 50-50. See you next week. I stood there in the sunlit room, the air suddenly feeling thin and cold. The 15th, that was next Tuesday, 10 days away. I heard the front door open and Chloe's footsteps in the hall. I quickly tapped the screen, closing the email app, returning the iPad to its home screen exactly as she had left it. I grabbed the laundry basket and walked out into the hallway, passing her. "Find your charger?" I asked. My voice was incredibly steady, a terrifying calm washing over me. "Yeah, under the seat," she sighed, not even looking at me. "God, this house is so dusty, Maya. You really need to hire a maid." "I'll get right on that," I said softly, continuing toward the laundry room. Once out of sight, I locked the door, sat on the cold tile floor, and covered my mouth to muffle the sob that tore from my chest. I cried for my parents, who loved those 2 monsters. I cried for the betrayal. And then, as the tears dried, a different emotion took root. It started as a spark and quickly ignited into a raging, blinding inferno. They wanted to play God with my parents' lives. They wanted to steal our family legacy and throw the people who raised us into a living hell. No, I would not let that happen. I wiped my face, stood up, and pulled out my phone. I had 10 days. It was time to go to war. The next morning, I told my parents that I needed to run to the pharmacy and handle some errands in town, arranging for a trusted neighbor to sit with them for a few hours. I drove straight to the offices of Henderson, Vance, and Caldwell. Arthur Henderson was a man in his late 60s, with a shock of white hair and the sharpest legal mind in the state. He had been my father's attorney and closest friend for 40 years. He handled the purchase of the estate, my parents' original wills, and every legal matter our family ever had. When I walked into his oak-paneled office and dropped a printed stack of the emails I had forwarded to myself from Chloe's iPad, his genial smile faded. For 20 minutes, the only sound in the office was the ticking of the grandfather clock and the rustle of paper as Mr. Henderson read the exchange. When he finally looked up, his eyes were flinty, his jaw set in a hard line. "These are their children," he whispered, his voice thick with disgust. "Arthur and Alina gave them everything." "They have a power of attorney, Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice tight. "They got them to sign it in the ICU 6 months ago. David paid off a doctor to activate it." Mr. Henderson steepled his fingers, his legal mind shifting into high gear. "A springing power of attorney requires a declaration of incapacity. If they used a crooked doctor who didn't actually examine them recently, we can fight it. But fighting it in court takes time. Months, maybe years. And in the meantime, they might be able to secure a preliminary order to move your parents and list the house. I don't have months, I have 9 days. They are coming on the 15th with moving trucks and a real estate agent to throw us out and send them to Sunnyside." Mr. Henderson stood up and began pacing the length of his office. "We need a tactical strike, something they won't see coming. The problem is the asset. The house is the target. If the house is gone, their motivation evaporates and their POA becomes effectively useless for their goals." "Can we put it in a trust?" I asked. "Yes, But if Arthur and Alina transfer it to a trust while David holds a supposedly active POA, David will immediately sue to invalidate the transfer, claiming they lacked capacity to create the trust. Mr. Henderson stopped pacing and looked out the window. No, the house can't just be transferred. It has to be sold. An arm's-length transaction for fair market value. If your parents sell the house for its actual appraised value, and the cash is immediately deposited into an irrevocable care trust designed specifically and exclusively to pay for their medical and living expenses, no judge in the country will overturn it. It proves they acted rationally to secure their own care. He turned back to me. But we need a buyer. Someone willing to drop $3 million in cash, close in under a week, and allow your parents to live there until they pass. He sighed heavily. It's impossible, Maya. We don't have time to find an investor willing to do that. I looked down at my hands. I thought about the long nights writing code in my 20s. I thought about the buyout offer from a massive tech conglomerate that I had accepted 5 years ago, the NDAs I signed, the quiet wealth I had accumulated and never touched because I was too busy changing oxygen tanks and pureeing food. I had lived like a pauper, wearing sweatpants and driving a 10-year-old Subaru, not because I had to, but because I had no time to spend the money I had earned. I looked up and met Mr. Henderson's eyes. "I'll buy it," I said. Mr. Henderson blinked. "Maya, sweetie, the house is worth over $3 million. I know you've been working part-time remotely, but—" "Mr. Henderson," I interrupted gently. 5 years ago, I sold a proprietary data compression algorithm to a major tech firm in Silicon Valley. After taxes, I walked away with $8.5 million. It's sitting in a diversified portfolio and high-yield accounts. I can have $3.2 million liquid by Wednesday. The silence in the room was absolute. Mr. Henderson stared at me, his mouth slightly open. Slowly, a massive, terrifyingly joyous grin spread across his wrinkled face. He let out a booming laugh that rattled the teacups on his desk. "My God," he chuckled, shaking his head. "You are Arthur's daughter, through and through, all right. Let's build the Iron Maiden." The next week was a blur of covert, high-stakes legal maneuvering. We had to move with absolute precision and total secrecy. The first and most heartbreaking step was telling my parents. I sat them down in the library that evening. The fire was crackling in the hearth. I held my mother's shaking hand and looked at my father, who was resting in his specialized recliner. I didn't show them the emails. It would have destroyed them completely. Instead, I explained that Mr. Henderson had uncovered a legal vulnerability regarding the documents David had them sign at the hospital. I told them that because of their health, there was a risk the state or creditors could force a sale of the house. "Mr. Henderson suggests we protect you," I told them softly. "I want to buy the house from you, at full market value. The money will go into an ironclad trust. The trust will pay for all your medical care, private nurses when we need them, anything you want. And you get to live here, in your home, until the very end. But we have to do it now. Today." My father looked at me, his eyes sharp despite his failing body. He saw through the gentle phrasing. He knew something was wrong, and he knew it involved David and Chloe. A profound sadness settled over his features, but he didn't ask for the gruesome details. He just nodded slowly. "Do it, Maya," Dad rasped, his voice weak but resolute. "Protect your mother. Protect the house." The next day, Mr. Henderson brought a specialized, independent neurologist to the estate. The doctor conducted a thorough 2-hour evaluation of both my parents and signed a sworn, notarized affidavit declaring that while they had physical limitations, they were entirely lucid, cognitively intact, and fully capable of understanding and executing complex legal and financial documents. This destroyed the foundation of David's fraudulent POA. By Thursday, the trust was established, the Arthur and Alina Hawthorne Irrevocable Care Trust. The stipulations were brutal and beautiful. The funds could only be used for the direct medical, housing, and life-quality expenses of my parents. Upon their passing, any remaining funds would be donated to the Parkinson's Foundation. Neither David, Chloe, nor even I could touch a single dime of the principal for personal use. On Friday morning, I executed the wire transfer. $3,200,000 left my private wealth management accounts and dropped securely into the trust. On Friday afternoon, Mr. Henderson arrived with the new deed. My parents signed it, I signed it, the notary stamped it. I was now the sole legal owner of the Hawthorne estate, but we weren't done. The emails detailed David and Chloe's plan to arrive with a fake eviction notice and try to forcibly remove us. We needed a shield. Armed with the emails detailing their conspiracy to defraud our parents, commit elder abuse by forcing them into a substandard facility against their will, and the fraudulent medical declaration, Mr. Henderson went to a judge he had known for 20 years. By Monday afternoon, a judge had signed an emergency permanent restraining order against David Hawthorne and Chloe Hawthorne, barring them from coming within 500 feet of my parents or the estate. The trap was fully set. The jaws were open. All we had to do was wait for the rats to step inside. Tuesday, October 15th. The morning was crisp and brilliantly sunny. I woke up at 5 a.m., completed the morning routine with my parents, and made sure they were comfortably settled in the den at the back of the house, watching classic movies with the volume turned up. I told them we were having some noisy maintenance work done out front and to just relax. I dressed carefully. I didn't wear my usual caregiving sweatpants. I wore a sharp, tailored black blazer, dark jeans, and boots. I felt like a soldier putting on armor. At 9:45 a.m., I made a pot of premium coffee. I poured myself a mug, walked into the grand foyer, and stood by the massive oak front doors. At exactly 9:58 a.m., the rumble of heavy diesel engines shattered the quiet of the estate. I looked through the sidelight windows. A rusted, cheap-looking moving truck had pulled into the circular driveway. Right behind it, a sleek black Mercedes SUV pulled up. Out stepped Marcus, the sleazy real estate agent, wearing a cheap suit that was too tight. And then, the stars of the show emerged. David, wearing his trademark smug grin and a cashmere overcoat, and Chloe, holding an iced matcha latte and wearing oversized designer sunglasses. They stood in the driveway, looking up at the house like they had just conquered a small nation. David clapped the real estate agent on the shoulder, pointing to the roofline. I took a sip of my coffee. My heart wasn't racing. I felt an icy, terrifying calm. I unlocked the deadbolt, turned the heavy brass handle, and pulled the front doors wide open. I stepped out onto the porch and leaned against the railing, holding my coffee mug. David and Chloe stopped dead in their tracks. They had expected me to be inside, unaware, perhaps vacuuming or giving Mom a bath. They did not expect me to be waiting for them like a sentry. David quickly recovered his composure, putting on a mask of false authority. He marched up the stone steps, pulling a thick manila folder from his briefcase. Chloe followed, smirking, her phone already out, likely recording. "Maya," David said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I'm glad you're out here. It saves us the trouble of dragging you out. I need you to pack your things." "You have 1 hour." "An hour is generous, Dave," Chloe sneered from behind him. "Honestly, Maya, just grab your clothes. The house needs to be staged by tomorrow." I took another sip of coffee. "Staged for what, Chloe?" David sighed, playing the weary executive. "It's time to face reality, Maya. Mom and Dad are declining. You're completely overwhelmed and doing a terrible job. As their legally appointed power of attorney, I have made the difficult but necessary decision to transition them to a full-time care facility. Sunnyside Meadows. It's already paid for. The movers are here to pack their room." "And the real estate agent?" I asked, nodding toward Marcus, who was awkwardly hovering near his Mercedes. "The house is being sold to cover their medical expenses," David lied smoothly, not missing a beat. "I have a cash buyer closing on Friday. I have the legal authority to do all of this. Inside this folder is the POA, your notice of eviction, and a police contact sheet if you decide to make this difficult. Now step aside." He tried to push past me. I didn't move. I just set my coffee mug down on the porch railing. "You're not going inside, David," I said. The tone of my voice was entirely devoid of emotion. It stopped him cold. "Excuse me," he barked, his face flushing with anger. "Maya, don't be an idiot. I have the legal right." "You have nothing," I interrupted. I reached into the inner pocket of my blazer and pulled out a crisp, folded legal document. "You have a fraudulently obtained, nullified document based on a fake medical evaluation." Chloe scoffed. Oh please, what is she talking about, Dave? Just call the cops. I wouldn't advise that, a new voice called out. From around the corner of the wraparound porch stepped Mr. Henderson. He was wearing his finest three-piece suit, carrying a leather satchel. Behind him were two uniformed sheriff's deputies, who had been quietly waiting in the side garden for the past 20 minutes. David took a step back, his arrogant facade cracking. Henderson, what the hell are you doing here? This is family business. I am the POA. You were a prospective agent under a springing POA, David, Mr. Henderson corrected, his voice echoing with absolute authority. However, a certified, independent neurologist evaluated your parents last week. They are legally competent. Your document is void. Furthermore, they fully revoked any and all previous powers of attorney. You can't do that, David yelled, panic bleeding into his voice. They're out of their minds. I'll contest it in court. I'll have the house tied up in litigation for years. You can't stop the sale. There is no sale to stop, David, I said softly. I unfolded the paper in my hand and held it out. Because the house has already been sold. David stared at me, his eyes darting frantically. Sold to who? That's impossible, I had the pocket listing. To me, I said. I let the words hang in the crisp autumn air. The silence was deafening. The moving crew in the driveway had stopped talking. Marcus, the real estate agent, took a discreet step backward toward his car. Chloe lowered her phone, her mouth hanging open. What, you don't have any money, you pathetic loser. You've been wiping asses for 5 years. I bought the Hawthorne estate last Friday for $3.2 million in cash, I stated clearly, looking directly into David's terrified eyes. The title is clear. The deed is recorded. This is my house. David lunged forward, snatching the copy of the deed from my hand. His eyes frantically scanned the page, reading the legal descriptions, the stamps, the signatures, and the final recorded owner. Maya Hawthorne, his hands began to shake. No, 3 million, where did you get? This is fraud, you stole their money to buy the house. Actually, Mr. Henderson interjected smoothly, opening his satchel, Maya used her own private, independently earned capital. The $3.2 million was wired directly into the newly formed Arthur and Alina Hawthorne Irrevocable Care Trust. A trust designed exclusively for their care, which neither you, nor Chloe, nor Maya can touch for personal use. The money is locked away, David. Forever, the house is Maya's. Your parents are fully funded for premium in-home care for the rest of their natural lives. I watched the exact moment David's entire world collapsed. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The $3 million he had already spent in his mind to save himself from bankruptcy, the inheritance he thought he was stealing, the house, all of it was gone. Evaporated. Ash in the wind, Chloe shrieked. Dave, what does he mean? My trip, my debt, Dave, do something. Shut up, Chloe, David roared, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. He turned his rage on me, taking an aggressive step forward, raising his fists. You absolute bitch, you set us up, you stole our inheritance. I'll kill you, I'll tear this place down. Before he could take another step, the two sheriff's deputies moved in seamlessly, stepping between us, their hands resting cautiously on their duty belts. Step back, sir, the taller deputy commanded. I have one more document for you, David, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I pulled a second folded paper from my pocket and handed it to the deputy, who handed it to David. I handed a third to Chloe. What is this? Chloe cried, looking at the legal jargon. That is a permanent restraining order, I explained, relishing the utter defeat in their postures. Signed by Judge Harrison yesterday. It bars both of you from coming within 500 feet of my parents, myself, or this property. It is based on a mountain of evidence, including your emails detailing your plan to defraud them and force them into an abusive facility. David looked down at the restraining order, his chest heaving. He looked like a man who had just stepped on a landmine and heard the click. If you or your sister ever try to contact them again, I continued, stepping right up to the deputy's line, locking eyes with my brother. If you ever set foot in this county again, I will have you arrested for violating the order. And then I will hand over the emails, the fraudulent medical documents, and the evidence of elder financial abuse to the district attorney. You won't just be bankrupt, David. You will go to state prison. David opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He looked at the house, the massive, beautiful estate that he had almost stolen. Then he looked at me, realizing for the first time in his life that the quiet, dutiful sister he had underestimated was the one holding the axe. He dropped the papers on the porch. He turned around, grabbed Chloe by the arm, who was now openly sobbing, her makeup running down her face, and dragged her toward Marcus's SUV. Marcus was already in the driver's seat, the engine running, terrified of being implicated. "Get your truck out of my driveway," I yelled to the moving crew. They scrambled into their cab and threw it into reverse. I stood on the porch with Mr. Henderson and the deputies and watched the black Mercedes and the rusted moving truck speed down the long gravel driveway, turning onto the main road and disappearing into the trees. They were gone, and they were never coming back. Mr. Henderson let out a long breath and clapped me gently on the shoulder. "Well executed, Maya." "Thank you, Arthur," I whispered, the adrenaline finally beginning to fade, leaving me with a profound, aching sense of relief. The aftermath was quiet, peaceful. David's life imploded exactly as expected. Without the massive cash infusion he had banked on, he was forced into Chapter 7 bankruptcy. His creditors seized his leased car, his apartment, and his assets. The last I heard through the grapevine, he was working as a junior clerk at a strip mall accounting firm in Ohio. Chloe was forced to move out of her luxury apartment and declared bankruptcy herself. Her influencer career died when she couldn't afford the lifestyle anymore. She now lives with a distant aunt in Florida, working retail. As for me, I am still here. The Hawthorne estate is safe. My parents are safe. The trust money allowed me to hire 2 incredible, full-time nurses to help me with the daily care. I am no longer exhausted. I have time to sit with my father in the garden while he points out the roses. I have time to listen to the classical music my mother loves without worrying about when I have to prepare the next round of medication. I bought back my life and I bought my parents' safety. I may have spent millions to do it, but every evening, when I walk through the mahogany halls of this beautiful, ancient house and hear the quiet